You stand in a dark Windsor chamber where candles gutter and the night air tastes of damp linen. The Sailor King is drowning on dry land. Each breath scrapes like a rope dragged across barnacled wood. Each pause hangs too long. On the coverlet his hand lies slack, the sea-tanned skin turned waxen. In the corner, a clock ticks toward 2 a.m., and Queen Adelaide, unmoving, unslept, keeps her vigil. For 10 days she has not gone to bed. Tonight you hear a whisper run through the room. He only wanted to live to see one more anniversary, to reach one last date on the nation's calendar. You listen, count the spaces between breaths, and feel the chamber gather itself around the coming moment. The air smells of cooling wax and June rain in the stone. You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness. If this kind of quiet, historically grounded storytelling helps you drift while you learn, please subscribe and like so you can find your way back. Tell us where you're listening from and what time it is right now, your country and your clock. Share why you clicked this story and what you want next. Your comments guide future episodes. It is the early morning of Tuesday, the 20th of June 1837. At Windsor Castle, you are a household attendant assigned to the sickroom, present, silent, and expected to observe without intruding. William IV, the third son of George III, has been king since 1830. To the public he is the Sailor King, a bluff former naval officer who favored plain speech and disliked ceremony. In private, in these final weeks, he is a man thinned by illness, watched over by the devout and steadfast Queen Adelaide. Outside, Britain is restless with summer and routine. Inside, everything contracts to a bed, a chair, a clock. The record is clear on the framework you can trust. After several weeks of decline, William's physicians and later historians named the cause of death as heart failure, with bronchopneumonia contributing to the end. He was 71. He died at Windsor on the 20th of June 1837. A striking human detail accompanies the outline. Multiple accounts report that Queen Adelaide would not go to bed, keeping vigil beside him for more than 10 days. Another detail is the time itself, recorded with unusual precision, shortly after 2 in the morning. What happens next is famously documented. At approximately 2:12 a.m., William IV dies, before dawn. Couriers will ride to Kensington Palace to wake his niece, 18-year-old Princess Victoria. By breakfast time she will be queen. In the weeks that follow, the kingdom will move through the choreography of mourning. The funeral will take place on the 8th of July in St. George's Chapel, Windsor. The coffin will descend into the royal vault under the chapel floor. Your role in this story is simple and therefore intimate. You are a quiet witness in the room, one of the staff whose duty is to fetch water, trim wicks, keep a path clear, and see. You are not a confidant, and you will not imagine thoughts for those who leave none in the record. This tale will hold to what can be checked: entries compiled by historians, official notices, contemporaries' descriptions of the vigil, the hour of death, the proclamation, and the funeral rites. When the sources allow, we will let the senses in: muffled bells, black crape, the close air of a crowded chapel, but we will not go beyond them. William's reign had steered the monarchy through turbulent reforms, the years of the 1832 Reform Act and the reshaping of Parliament's representation. Yet he leaves no legitimate surviving children. So the succession passes to his niece, Victoria of Kent. That is the wide map. The narrow map is this room, the narrowed air, the measured steps of physicians who have attended 3 sovereigns, and the uncompromising steadiness of a queen consort who will not abandon her post. From this room the story will widen, to Kensington before dawn, to proclamations, to a funeral in July, but for now you stand at the hinge of a reign and listen to a clock. You begin with a date that mattered to him: Sunday, the 18th of June 1837. In the castle's rooms, the household whispers that the king has held on for this day, the anniversary of Waterloo. A few visitors are quietly admitted, most are turned away. James, the footman who shares your corridor, repeats the rumor that Her Majesty will not lie down. Another says she has not slept in a bed for more than 10 days. only dozing upright in a chair near the curtains. The account is not gossip alone, later retellings, drawn from family and servants, will say the same. Adelaide refuses rest while he breathes. On Monday the 19th, the air is close and warm. The medical men move with a practiced choreography. They are the sort whose names recur across royal sickbeds. President of the Royal College here. A baronet there, experienced, able, guarded. No public bulletin lists each potion or poultice. And you will not pretend to know what was not written. But you can see what anyone could have seen. The breath now rattles. The face has the dull pallor that leads attendants to lower their voices without being told. A basin is set ready. Windows are adjusted to balance air against chill. The talk of remedies fades. The talk of timing begins. From time to time, Adelaide's ladies enter and withdraw, their skirts whispering. One brings a cloth to refresh the queen's brow. Another passes a note from the equerries. The stables must be ready for messengers through the night. The queen's presence is composed, her manner deferential to the physicians. But all can see she will not leave the room if she can help it. The small devotions, her folded hands, an open prayer book, are not theatrics for the court. They are the fixed habits of a woman known for steadiness and piety. You, trained to watch without staring, learn how still a human figure can be when stillness is duty. Late that evening you hear a murmur about the hour. Timekeeping in a royal household is a discipline, and on a final night it becomes a script. Candles are trimmed. The watch is set. The nearest clock is checked for accuracy. You note, because you have been taught to note, the way attendants glance from the patient's chest to the timepiece, as if the two instruments might agree when words cannot. You are told that if a crisis comes, the chamberlain must be found, and the chaplain, and that the queen will be guided in whatever rites she desires. Just after midnight the symptoms change from fluctuation to drift. The pauses between breaths lengthen. The staff's movements sharpen in inverse proportion, quiet but quick, like sailors on a dark deck who know the next command before it lands. The comparison would have pleased William in healthier days, for he loved the Navy and took a sailor's pride in order and readiness. In these last hours he can show no such command, only a body giving way by degrees. At some point, a whisper mentions that the 18th has passed. He has, in the phrase a courtier will later use, kept Waterloo. The remark is not made to the patient, it is made to the room, as if to satisfy a condition the dying man himself once named. The queen's eyes do not leave the bed. A chair creaks. The clock inches toward 2. What causes the end is no mystery of violence or poison, no Gothic intrigue to be unmasked. Later historians, reading doctor's notes and official notices, will call it heart failure, with bronchopneumonia pressing down the lungs. He is 71, an age when such failure is common and rarely sudden. It accumulates like fog on the river, thickening until nothing moves. You, who have carried coals and fetched warm cloths and kept the doorway clear, see this accumulation. There is no cry, no drama of last words inscribed for posterity, only breaths that become pauses, and pauses that become silence. At 2:12 in the morning, on Tuesday, the 20th of June 1837, the time is spoken softly and repeated. The chamberlain nods once, as if answering a question asked by the air. An equerry steps away to give orders for the messages that must fly before dawn. The chaplain offers the prayers appointed in the rites for the dying. And then for the dead. You stand aside as Adelaide, still seated, closes her eyes. Some will later say she did not sleep in a bed for 10 nights, some say more than 10. Either way the number lands because the posture has been witnessed. The queen did not forsake the room. The stillness after death has its own tasks. A senior lady opens a drawer to remove a length of black crepe for the door. Another sends for sheets to be changed and for the curtains to be drawn. Word must be relayed to those who have rooms within call, the Duke of Sussex, the Fitz-Clarences, faithful servants whose lives have run with the king's since the years when he was merely the bluff, outspoken Duke of Clarence. But the greatest relay is outward. Before sunrise, Horses will take the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Lord Chamberlain to Kensington Palace. Before the sky lifts from violet to grey, another part of the ritual engages beyond your corridor. At Kensington Palace, the Lord Chamberlain, Lord Conyngham, and the Archbishop of Canterbury will wake the princess to tell her that her uncle is dead and that she is queen. By 6 in the morning she will receive them, modestly dressed, calm, and attentive. Within hours she will hold her first council and take the oath. The distances from Windsor to Kensington are not great, but the symbolism is: one household stilled, another awakened to sovereignty. Those who will later write the notices also preserve a small, strange note: the king's wish to reach the anniversary of Waterloo. Courtiers and later chroniclers repeat it often enough that it becomes part of the official memory. A private superstition set against a public calendar. It was, in a plain sense, achieved. On Sunday the 18th the day came and went, and on the Tuesday following he died. The remark will appear in sympathetic histories as if to give his obstinacy a final measure. For the household, there is a peculiar strangeness in the minutes just after the declaration. Much must be done, yet nothing may seem hurried. A few remove the watchers' chairs. Someone, perhaps you, lifts the spent candles and replaces them with fresh ones that will burn through the gray of dawn. The king's hand is arranged. The jaw is supported by a discreet bandage. As is customary, to keep the face in repose. The room is cooled as much as June will allow. It is not indecency to acknowledge these things. They are the practical pieties of attendants who must protect dignity against time. Outside, the corridor thickens with the sound of shoes. A messenger returns, breathless, then departs again. The distances are short but the errands many. At some point, a memorandum goes to the College of Arms. Morning orders must be proclaimed. Bells will be muffled. Court servants will trade colored facings for black. The royal standard will follow rules that have more to do with law than with sorrow. All of it lays a path from this bed to a nation's ritual. When, after what may be half an hour or more, the first formal words are written down, you realize that your part has been the smallest and therefore the closest to watch. You have seen enough to understand why the accounts were spared. There was no spectacle, only a long, human yielding, and a queen's long, human watch. The sailor king, beyond argument a man of the sea and of blunt habits, died not in a storm, nor on a deck, but in a quiet room whose windows faced the June trees. You mark the time in your mind and, when relieved, bow and step backward into the corridor. By dawn, printed orders will begin to ripple outward. Court in full mourning. Servants to wear black crepe. Bells to be muffled. Guns to be fired in measured salute. You, dismissed to rest, carry the room's hush in your clothes. Silence clinging, for now. The first light of Tuesday, the 20th of June 1837. Breaks pale through Windsor's narrow panes. You step into the corridor and find that sound has returned. Boots. Paper. Whispers. The shuffling of servants who have been awake since midnight. A thin mist clings to the castle grounds, smelling faintly of wet stone and horse sweat. Someone has already drawn the curtains across the king's windows. A small piece of ritual order in a world suddenly without its axis. William IV's body lies within the same chamber, attended by chaplains and physicians who will soon sign the formal certificates. Their movements are precise, almost clerical. The death of a monarch is not merely an end, it is a legal event. Each document must bear the right hands, the right seals, and the correct hour. The entry, 2:12 a.m., will be written 3 times in the course of the morning, once in the doctor's book, once in the castle log, once in the proclamation sent to London. You descend toward the lower ward, passing under arches where footmen stand waiting for orders. Horses are being harnessed. Every stable boy knows that speed is now ceremony. Every delay is sacrilege. The messenger's first destination is Kensington Palace, where the young Princess Victoria still sleeps, unaware that the course of her life and the empire's rhythm have shifted in the same moment. The clock has not yet struck 6. The official account is plain. At dawn, The Lord Chamberlain, Lord Conyngham, and the Archbishop of Canterbury rode through wet streets to Kensington. They were admitted after knocking twice. Victoria appeared in a simple white nightdress and robe, calm, composed, and modest, receiving them with what witnesses called perfect self-possession. She was 18 years and 1 month old. In that instant she became Queen of Great Britain and Ireland. Back at Windsor, the change of reign feels less like triumph and more like vacuum. Servants pin black crepe on uniforms. The royal standard is lowered to half-mast above the round tower. Church bells toll in half-muffled tones, one clear strike followed by one damped. A pattern that sends a slow pulse through the castle. The air thickens with candle soot and the mineral scent of ink. You find that grief has an odor: beeswax, damp wool, and starch. At 9 o'clock, a herald reads the first internal notice. His Majesty William IV expired at Windsor Castle at 12 minutes past 2 o'clock this morning. Each word is deliberate, restrained. It is not permitted to say, died. The phrase expired is used instead, as if the breath simply withdrew. By mid-morning, word spreads beyond the castle walls. Messengers ride for the Home Office, the Admiralty, and the Horse Guards. The Times prints a brief paragraph by noon. The longer eulogies will follow in days. The streets of London, still hazy from coal smoke, absorb the news with polite sorrow rather than shock. The reign had been short, barely 7 years, but steady. A good king, one headline will call him. Plain in manner, honest in purpose. Inside Windsor, attention shifts from death to display. The Lord Chamberlain's office begins to prepare the lying in state. Though for William IV it will be a private version, less public than the grand exhibitions of his predecessors. His will had expressed simplicity. He wished for no elaborate pageant, no endless carriages of peers. That wish, too, will be respected. You return to the death chamber late in the morning. The Queen Consort, Adelaide, remains within. Her face is pale, but her posture does not waver. She has sent for prayers and for a small breakfast that she will not eat. In later days, witnesses will write that she aged 10 years overnight. She speaks to no one but the chaplain and her ladies. When one attendant tries to persuade her to rest, she answers softly, "I promised to stay." The physicians have finished their examinations. The body shows the signs expected after cardiac failure and pulmonary congestion: pale lips, slight edema in the hands. They note, too, the absence of suffering at the very end. Peaceful, one writes, as if language might soften decay. Sheets are changed. The jaw band is tightened gently to preserve dignity. You glimpse the Queen standing nearby as this is done. Her stillness is more commanding than any order. In the corridor, men in black coats discuss logistics. The coffin must be constructed of mahogany, lined with lead, and then encased in another wooden shell, a precaution against leakage. A lesson learned from earlier burials in the royal vault. The undertakers, already summoned from London, will arrive by evening. The official mourning period will begin at midnight, to last until the 7th of July. The funeral itself is fixed for the 8th of July, 1837. In St. George's Chapel, your duties shift with the hour. You help drape black cloth across the stair rails. Each fold must hang straight, no corners visible. In the great hall, craftsmen work in silence, their hammers muffled with rags. Outside, gardeners cut down bright summer blooms and replace them with darker foliage, laurel, yew, box. The transformation is swift and absolute. In less than 12 hours, Windsor becomes a city of mourning. After noon, members of the royal family arrive. The Duke of Sussex, the Duke of Cambridge, the Fitzclarence sons, illegitimate but acknowledged, enter one by one. There are formal greetings, brief embraces, and the subdued ritual of condolence. The chaplain reads a passage from the Book of Common Prayer. In the midst of life we are in death. The words hang in the air, as cold as the flagstones beneath your shoes. Later, when you carry linens to the servants' quarters, you hear how the news has spread beyond the castle. In taverns from Slough to London Bridge, Patrons raise glasses to Good King William. The Navy's signal stations have already lowered their flags. The fleet will fire minute guns in remembrance. Newspapers recall that the king had been a midshipman at 15, that he had served at Cape St. Vincent in New York, that he had dined with sailors long after becoming king. The Sailor King is gone. The headlines read, "Evening brings new instructions." The undertakers arrive with their materials: black velvet, brass handles, sealing lead. The air fills with the metallic odor of solder and resin. When the workmen finish, the coffin is lined with white satin and laid open for the physician's final inspection. The king's body is then transferred carefully. A small embroidered pillow supports his head. A crown and scepter rest temporarily on a side table to be arranged later. Candles are lit at each corner, their flames steady in the heavy air. For you, the most haunting detail is the sound of the lid being closed, not slammed, not hammered, but eased down until the hinges sigh. The undertakers seal the lead lining, pour melted wax along the seam, and affix the royal cipher. The odor of molten metal mixes with perfume and faint decay, a combination that makes you lightheaded. You steady yourself against the wall until it passes. Outside the chamber, a different kind of preparation unfolds. The College of Arms finalizes the funeral orders, procession routes, uniforms, timings, heraldic banners. A draft reads, "The body of His late Majesty shall be conveyed from Windsor Castle to St. George's Chapel on the morning of Saturday, the 8th of July." That same document specifies the arrangement of mourners by rank, the Prince of Wales's banner to lead, followed by dukes, knights, chaplains, and finally the coffin borne by guards of the household division. As the day closes, you step briefly outside. The June air has cooled. From the north terrace you can see the lamps of Windsor town flickering like dull embers. A few villagers kneel as they pass the gate, making the sign of the cross or whispering prayers. The castle bells strike 9, each toll a soft wound in the evening. Back inside, Queen Adelaide finally consents to move to an adjoining room. She leaves the door open so she can still see the threshold of the death chamber. You watch her pause there, looking once toward the coffin before turning away. The gesture is small but unforgettable. It is the end of vigilance and the beginning of mourning. When you are dismissed to rest, the corridors are lit by a double line of candles leading to the king's door. Guards stand motionless in half shadow, their halberds gleaming faintly. Somewhere deep in the castle, a scribe continues to write notices through the night, copying the same date again and again, the 20th of June 1837. The king is gone. The new queen sleeps under the same sky, in another palace, beginning the reign that will bear her name for more than 60 years. The Sailor King's body lies in silence, waiting for the next ceremony. You walk the corridor once more, hearing only the slow tick of the clock that had measured his final breaths. Morning light breaks over Windsor on the 8th of July, 1837. The castle is silent except for the slow toll of St. George's Chapel bell, measured, deliberate, every 60 seconds. You stand among servants lining the lower ward, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and horses waiting in harness. Inside the great chapel, preparations have reached their still conclusion. The Sailor King's coffin rests upon a raised platform, draped in deep violet velvet embroidered with gold thread. The crown and scepter placed upon it in exact symmetry. Around it, wax candles burn in tall silver holders, their flames barely wavering in the warm air. Outside, the morning is already thick with heat. The sky holds that pale, unmoving light peculiar to English summer funerals, neither radiant nor dim, simply relentless. The royal vault waits beneath the chapel floor, its flagstones rubbed smooth by centuries of ceremony. Somewhere below lie George III, Queen Charlotte, and the Duke of Kent. Soon William IV will join them, another monarch reduced to heraldry and marble dust. You are a footman again today, stationed along the north aisle. Every movement has been rehearsed. The College of Arms has printed a booklet dictating even the length of pause between each step. The official mourners, dukes, marquises, admirals, stand in 2 rows, their black plumes trembling slightly. The king's naval officers have come in full dress uniform, dark blue coats, gold epaulets, swords reversed, white gloves clutching cocked hats against their chests. Among them, older men with sea-weathered faces look down, eyes wet. They called him the Sailor King for good reason, because even on the throne he never forgot the roll of the deck, the sting of salt on his skin, or the camaraderie of men who lived by tides and rope. The Queen Dowager, Adelaide, arrives quietly. Her mourning veil trails against the steps. She refuses a chair, choosing instead to stand during the service. In her face there is neither spectacle nor stoicism, only fatigue that seems almost translucent. When she bows her head, the chapel light catches the silver threads in her hair. You remember that she had kept vigil 10 days and nights. The body may have rested, but her soul has not. The organ begins, slow chords rolling through stone like the swell of a distant sea. The choir sings, "I am the resurrection and the life," the same words that have echoed under these vaults for generations. The sound is grand but not comforting. You smell beeswax, wilted lilies, and a faint undertone of lead and varnish from the coffin. Death has its own vocabulary of odors, sweet, mineral, and final. When the clergy move forward, you glimpse the Archbishop of Canterbury, old and grave, his voice carrying the ancient words that have bridged monarchs and centuries. Each phrase is measured to fill the vault in return, like waves against a hull. The coffin is then lifted by 8 guards of the household division. You watch their muscles tighten under the weight. The lead lining makes it heavy, almost half a ton. They bear it with slow precision down the nave, boots striking the floor in rhythm with the bell outside. The sound builds. Step, bell, breath, echo. As the procession turns toward the choir, the scent of candle smoke thickens. You note how every spectator seems to hold their breath. The coffin halts before the steps to the altar. The chaplain speaks the words of commendation. We therefore commit his body to the ground. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. For a brief instant the chapel is utterly still. The silence so deep you can hear the faint crackle of wax dripping onto brass. Then comes the descent. 2 vergers pull aside a section of carved flooring to reveal the mouth of the vault. The opening yawns like a wound. A length of black cloth hides the mechanics, but you can hear the creak of pulleys and the low groan of ropes lowering the coffin. The bell continues outside, 1 tone per minute. As the coffin sinks out of sight, a gust of cooler air rises from below, carrying the scent of stone, lime, and ancient damp. The crowd instinctively bows their heads, as if the cold itself demands reverence. When the coffin reaches the bottom, the ropes slacken. The vergers signal completion with a nod. Down in the vault, by lamplight, a small group of attendants receives it onto an iron bier beside those of George III and Queen Charlotte. Later the opening will be sealed with mortar and iron plates. For now, only the murmur of prayers remains. The king has rejoined his ancestors in the most literal sense, stone above, stone below, and centuries pressing in from all sides. The final hymn swells and fades. The Queen Dowager departs first, her veil catching on a pew before she passes through the arch. The crowd waits until she is gone before moving. The nobles file out in solemn order, the rustle of silk and wool merging with the lingering smell of incense. In the aisle, candle flames gutter as a draft slips through the great doors. Outside, the sunlight stings your eyes. The courtyard has filled with spectators, townspeople, soldiers, children lifted onto shoulders. Some women weep openly, others bow. The guns on the long walk fire in salute, the thunder rolling across the fields toward the Thames. The cortege dissolves as quickly as it formed. Carriages depart for London. The choir boys run laughing once they're out of sight. Duty has ended, life resumes. But you linger at the chapel steps, unwilling to leave the sound behind. Each echo feels like an afterimage of breath. You imagine the vault beneath your feet, rows of sealed coffins. Air thick with age, silence kept by dust. The Sailor King, who once commanded decks and tides, now lies anchored in darkness, his voyage complete. That evening, Windsor returns to its muted rhythm. The banners remain black, the servants whisper, but the machinery of monarchy has already shifted elsewhere, to Kensington, to Buckingham, to a young queen writing her first proclamations. Newspapers describe the funeral as dignified and unostentatious, praising Adelaide's devotion and William's naval humility. He died as he lived, one writes, without grandeur but with honesty. In the servants' hall, you overhear stories that will survive as legend. One claims the queen refused to change out of mourning for the rest of her life. Another says that when she finally left Windsor for the countryside, she knelt before his portrait and whispered, "I have done my duty." Whether true or not, the image lingers. Night comes again. The bells are silent now, replaced by the hum of crickets and the soft hooves of guards' horses outside. You walk once more past St. George's Chapel. Through a narrow window, faint candlelight still glows over the choir stalls, left burning until morning in respect. The air is cooler, cleaner, the sharp scent of rain on slate. You pause, imagining the sealed vault below, the damp settling on stone and lead, and the king's body slowly giving back to time what time once gave him. You realize that death, in its strange way, has order. It demands witnesses, signatures, hymns, and hands. But once the ceremonies end, all hierarchy collapses. Admiral or monarch, servant or sailor, each becomes part of the same quiet matter beneath the floor. You close your eyes, listening to the faint echo of the last cannon fading across the valley, and think of how the sea might sound if heard from inside a coffin, distant, eternal, without beginning or end. By the morning of the 9th of July 1837, the first Sunday after the funeral, London had returned to its uneasy rhythm. Yet if you stand on any street, from Piccadilly to Wapping, you feel the hush that follows a royal death. Draped shop fronts still hang with black crape, church bells ring in slow, hollow cadence, and newspapers printed overnight lie folded in doorways, their columns edged in mourning borders. You, a modest clerk sent from Windsor to assist with correspondence at the Admiralty, walk the Strand and sense that the city itself is holding its breath. William IV was not a monarch of grandeur. He had been popular because he was human, blunt, open, and oddly plain in a court that often seemed allergic to honesty. The papers remind the public that he had once commanded a frigate and dined with midshipmen, that as Duke of Clarence he lived simply in Bushy Park, that he hated pomp and sometimes laughed at the stiffness of his own office. The Morning Chronicle calls him the most unpretending of kings. But even simplicity, when removed, leaves a silence. Across the river, at Greenwich Hospital, retired sailors gather in their blue coats and tricorns. They drink to his memory in pewter mugs, raising them toward the gray Thames. He was one of us, an old gunner says, slapping the table. The sentiment spreads through taverns and dockyards. The Sailor King had understood the language of ships, storms, and rations better than that of courtiers. The Navy's signal stations lower their flags again at noon. One last gesture before the mourning period lapses. In Westminster Abbey, the Sunday sermon is devoted to him. The dean preaches on the brevity of life and the steadfastness of faith. Avoiding political illusion, you stand among listeners who bow their heads more from etiquette than grief. Still, a genuine melancholy threads through the air. Many remember that William's reign, though short, had overseen the Reform Act of 1832, a cautious opening of political rights that avoided revolution. To those who had feared upheaval, his plainness had been stability. Farther afield, telegrams and couriers carry the news across the empire. From Halifax to Calcutta, churches toll their bells in synchronized mourning. On naval ships stationed in the Mediterranean, officers read funeral prayers on deck. Facing the wind, the log of HMS Britannia records, at sunset, fired one gun every minute for 71 minutes. The age of our late sovereign. The ritual links ship and shore, an empire's heartbeat aligned to loss. But mourning, even for a king, decays as swiftly as flesh. Within a week, pamphlets appear celebrating the new queen, young Victoria, radiant and unblemished by politics. Her portrait is everywhere, on broadsheets, medallions, biscuit tins. The transition feels abrupt, as if time itself is impatient. The last reign, though respected, is already a chapter concluded. Still, for a few, especially those who served him, the grief holds shape. At Windsor, Queen Adelaide remains in semi-seclusion. The castle corridors are quiet, her footsteps are the only sound. She writes daily letters to relatives in Germany, letters that survive, faintly scented with lavender and sorrow. In one, she confesses, "I am calm but broken. He was my life, and my place beside him was my only joy." The Queen Dowager's mourning clothes will remain unchanged until her own death 12 years later. You, having returned to Windsor to deliver dispatches, see her only once more. She is walking the terrace in the evening, accompanied by a single lady in waiting, her veil lifting slightly in the breeze. She moves slowly, pausing at intervals as if listening for something, the echo of boots on stone, the cadence of the bell, perhaps the sea itself in the distance of memory. She will later fund the construction of a small chapel at Whitley, Surrey, in his memory, simplicity again, as he would have wished. In London, the court enters the period known as full mourning. Gentlemen wear black gloves and armbands. Ladies dress in bombazine and crepe. Veiled for 3 months, tailors and milliners profit, as they always do, from grief. Even the theaters remain closed for a week, though by the second Saturday the lights return. Commerce, like the tide, refuses to stay still. You attend a service at St. Martin in the Fields, not from devotion but from curiosity. The pews are crowded with clerks, widows, sailors, and the merely bored. When the hymn begins, the sound is unexpectedly fragile, hundreds of voices trembling in uneven harmony. The words "for all the saints who from their labors rest" seem to lift the ceiling. And for a moment you feel what the chroniclers later describe, the strange unity of collective mourning. A sense that death levels hierarchy. That evening, you visit the docks at Deptford. Ships lie moored in the twilight, their rigging clinking faintly. The tide is out, exposing slick mud and scattered debris. A few sailors have chalked WIV on a warehouse wall, encircled by an anchor and a crown, a makeshift memorial, soon to wash away with the next rain. You pause there, thinking of the king's final breath at Windsor, of Adelaide's sleepless vigil, and of how swiftly the world folds over its dead. Historians in later generations will treat his reign as an interlude, a bridge between the extravagance of George IV and the iron longevity of Victoria. Yet for those who lived through it, William IV's time felt like a reprieve, a soft wind between storms. He had legalized trade unions, overseen the abolition of slavery across the empire in 1833, and restored a measure of humility to the crown. None of it will glitter in marble, but it will remain in record books and in quieter hearts. Weeks pass. By early August, the mourning banners at Windsor are taken down. The castle regains its color, though the Queen Dowager's apartments stay dim. St. George's Chapel reopens to visitors. On guided tours, the verger points out the new inscription in the Royal Vault Register, William IV. Born the 21st of August 1765, died the 20th of June 1837, buried the 8th of July 1837. The words are neat, symmetrical, bloodless. You realize that every life, even a king's, eventually contracts to an entry in a ledger. You descend the steps toward the vault once more. The door is sealed with iron bolts and lime mortar, but the stone above it bears a faint moisture, a slow breathing of the earth. You touch the surface and find it cool. Down below, in perpetual shadow, the Sailor King rests beside the mother who birthed him and the father who went mad. The air inside that chamber will never change. Its silence will outlast memory. Back in London, crowds already press outside Buckingham Palace hoping for a glimpse of young Victoria. They shout her name with hopeful excitement. The new era has begun. Optimism replaces solemnity. but in the quiet hours, when the bells have stopped and the gaslights flicker, some older citizens feel a subtle unease, as if the passing of the last, ordinary, king marks the end of something unrepeatable. In the taverns near Charing Cross, where sailors and merchants meet, they still tell stories of William's humor, that he once poured his own ale at a state dinner, that he scolded dukes as though they were deckhands, that he could not bear to see a man whipped for theft. Some tales are apocryphal, others verifiable, yet in their retelling, the king becomes less a figure of authority and more a memory of decency, an echo of plain speech in a world that loves ceremony. You, now dismissed from royal service, keep a small memento, a folded scrap of mourning ribbon cut from the draperies of his chamber. It smells faintly of dust and candle grease. Sometimes, years later, you unfold it to remember the hush of that June night, the moment when the room at Windsor held its breath and a nation turned a page. There will be grander funerals to come, and louder kings, but few deaths so quiet, so strangely human. William IV left no great mausoleum, no marble effigy reaching toward heaven, only a vault beneath a chapel floor, a widow's vigil, and the memory of a monarch who once preferred the sea's rough honesty to the court's silken deceit. And so the nation mourned, not with wailing, but with a long exhale, the kind a sailor gives when the wind finally dies, and the waves, for the first time in days, fall silent. The castle has emptied of ceremony. It is autumn, 1837, and Windsor stands quiet beneath drifting rain. The air smells of damp stone, tallow, and the faint rot of fallen leaves in the courtyard. You are still in service here, though your duties have changed. Where once you attended to a king, now you serve a widow. Queen Adelaide of Saxe-Meiningen, Dowager Queen of the United Kingdom, walks the long galleries like a ghost haunting her own devotion. Her mourning dress never lightens. Each morning she is laced into heavy black bombazine, a small silver cross at her throat. Servants whisper that she owns dozens of identical gowns, so no one need see the same fabric twice. The shutters in her apartments remain half closed. Daylight enters only as filtered gray. In these rooms the clocks are muffled, mirrors veiled. A visitor might think time itself has been draped in crepe. You remember her as she was during the vigil, pale but unyielding. That same composure has hardened into ritual. She rises early, attends chapel, writes letters, and receives almost no guests. Her health, never strong, has worsened. The physicians blame a chronic cough and rheumatism. She blames nothing. In her correspondence, preserved in archives, she writes simply, "I am calm, resigned, and wait for God's mercy." Each day begins with prayer in the small private chapel at Windsor. There, beneath the echoing vaults, she kneels alone. The chaplain reads softly, his words lost in the hollow acoustics. When he departs, she remains long after, lips moving soundlessly. Those who spy through the doorway say her eyes often rest on a single embroidered cushion bearing the initials, W.R., William Rex. It was the cushion that once supported his Bible. In November she leaves Windsor for the countryside. Seeking air and solitude, you accompany her household to Mickleham in Surrey, where she rents a modest house among beech woods. It is a strange sight, a queen dowager living almost as a provincial widow. No court, no formal audiences, only the sound of rain against window panes and the soft bark of her little dog. The servants grow accustomed to her silence. Meals are simple. Broth, tea, a little bread. She eats sparingly, often feeding crumbs to birds outside. The newspapers, in respectful tones, call her the virtuous Queen Dowager. They report her charities, funding schools for sailors' children, endowing almshouses for widows, donating to hospitals without fanfare. Even as her body weakens, she continues this quiet labor. The people, remembering her vigil, hold her in rare affection. The same plain piety that once made her seem dull now makes her beloved. By 1838, the young Queen Victoria has been crowned, and the nation's gaze has shifted entirely. Adelaide writes to her niece with warmth, signing each letter, "Your affectionate aunt and humble servant." She asks for no influence and gives none. Yet Victoria, though barely 19, responds with gratitude, calling her the best and kindest of friends. History will record that affection as genuine. You travel with Adelaide when she moves again, to Sudbury Hall. Then to Whitley Court in Worcestershire. There she commissions a small chapel, the Queen Adelaide Chapel, built of local stone and crowned with a modest spire. She oversees every detail herself, the plain pews, the simple altar, the inscription dedicating it to the glory of God and in memory of William IV. When it is complete, she kneels at the threshold and whispers, "Now I may rest." But rest eludes her. By 1843, her health has declined sharply. Chronic bronchitis, dropsy, and what physicians call a wasting of the constitution confine her indoors. She sits by the fire wrapped in shawls, her breath shallow, her handwriting growing smaller with each month. You bring her correspondence, letters from Victoria, from German relatives, from parish priests thanking her for donations. She reads them all with the same faint smile. There are days when she speaks of Windsor. "I see him sometimes," she says softly, "at night, when the lamp is low. I do not fear it." You know she means the king, not as vision or haunting, but as the steady presence of memory. When you ask if she wishes to return to Windsor for Christmas, she shakes her head. "I said farewell to that house," she answers. "It belongs to the living now." Outside her window, autumn slides toward winter. The garden is bare except for yew and ivy, the same plants she once chose for the mourning garlands at his funeral. The symmetry feels deliberate, though she never says so. Each afternoon she requests that the chapel bell be rung once, a single clear tone across the fields. "It reminds me of the ships," she explains. "They always rang for change of watch." In 1847, 10 years after William's death, her illness worsens. Physicians prescribe warm baths, leeches, digitalis, and draughts of camphor. None help. Her appetite vanishes. Her weight falls alarmingly. Still she insists on attending prayers each morning, carried there in a chair by 2 footmen. Her letters from this period, written in a frail but steady hand, end with the same line, "Pray for me that I may be patient and thankful." On the 2nd of December 1849, the Dowager Queen takes to her bed for the last time. The records say she remained conscious, serene, and without fear. At 2 in the morning, a strangely familiar hour, she murmurs the words of a hymn, "Rock of Ages." "Cleft for me." Then she is still. You are in the adjoining room when the bell rings for the physician. There is no panic, only formality. Curtains are drawn, candles lit. The house falls into that quiet you have known before, the hush of completion. Her body is laid out in simple white linen, a small cross in her folded hands. Unlike the king's funeral pomp, her wishes are modest. No state procession, no long cortege. Her coffin is of plain oak, unadorned except for a silver plate reading Adelaide, Queen Dowager, consort of William IV. Her funeral takes place at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, on the 13th of December 1849, 12 years and 5 months after the king's. You stand once more within those walls. Older now, your uniform faded, the same bell tolls, the same prayers rise, yet the crowd is smaller. No dukes in plumed hats, no volleys of cannon, only clergy, household servants, and a few naval officers who had served under William. The coffin descends into the royal vault beside her husband's. The verger notes in the register, "Queen Adelaide, consort of His late Majesty King William IV, interred December 13th, 1849. The handwriting matches that of the earlier entry. 2 lines, side by side, bound by stone. As the stone slab is replaced, you notice how the damp creeps upward, leaving faint salt patterns like sea foam. The symbolism is not lost on you. The sailor king and the queen who watched his last tide have come to rest in a vault that breathes like the belly of a ship, dark, confined, eternal. When the service ends, you linger alone in the nave. The candlelight flickers against the memorial brass, throwing small ripples of gold across the floor. Outside, snow begins to fall on the castle roof. Soft and soundless, the world has turned again. You recall her last words before taking to bed, "When I die, let there be no grandeur. Let there be peace." And so there is, peace of the kind found only in places where time has stopped counting, the peace of stone, of echo, of faithful service rendered and completed. Years later, when you are old and dismissed from duty, you will visit the chapel again as a tourist. Among strangers, the guide will point to the spot in the floor where their coffins rest and say, "William IV, the Sailor King, and his Queen, Adelaide, lie here." You will stand a little apart, remembering the smell of beeswax and damp cloth, the sound of the bell at 2 in the morning, and the sight of her veiled figure refusing to leave his bedside. The others will move on, murmuring about history, about royalty, about distant centuries, but you will remain for a moment longer, listening to the silence that has become their truest monument. Because death, in the end, is not strange at all. It is devotion carried to its quiet conclusion. Years have passed. The vault beneath St. George's Chapel grows colder with every winter. But above it the world has changed beyond recognition. Steam engines thunder where carriages once clattered. Telegraph wires hum across the countryside. And the young queen who succeeded him has grown into a monarch whose reign defines the century. Yet if you stand once more before the worn brass plate that bears his name, William IV, born 1765, died 1837, you feel that the silence around it holds its own kind of truth. The Sailor King did not leave behind monuments of marble or conquests carved into maps. His legacy is quieter, like the tide that shapes the shore without fanfare. You, older now, return to Windsor as a visitor rather than a servant. The air in the chapel smells as it always did, cold lime, beeswax, faint mildew. A verger sweeps the nave, humming absently. He tells tourists in half-whispered routine that William IV's reign was transitional, a polite historian's word for something nearly forgotten. Yet those who knew the man remember the opposite, a life made of plain speech, decency, and reluctant duty. He never sought the throne, it fell to him through attrition, through the deaths of brothers and nieces. He took it not as privilege but as command. Like the sea, he once said, "You cannot bargain with it, you can only steer." His legacy lies in the reforms he did not resist. It was under his name that the Reform Act of 1832 was passed, breaking centuries of electoral stagnation. It was his government that saw through the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833, granting freedom across the empire's colonies. Though imperfectly, the public seldom connects these milestones to him. Yet they would not have passed without his uneasy consent. Historians note that he favored moderation, never radical, never reactionary, a kind of honesty rare in royal blood. He had been, to his last breath, a sailor first. Portraits show him in uniform, eyes squinting slightly as if looking into wind. The sea had written itself into his gestures, the habit of steady footing, the instinct to trust crew over courtiers. Even as king, he detested pomp. During state dinners, he often poured his own wine and told stories of storms at sea, to the horror of ministers who preferred polite silence. The servants called him good-humored, a monarch who spoke plainly, who laughed loudly, who thanked them by name. But what time does to such a man as erasure? Greatness in history often depends on spectacle, and William's reign had none. It began in middle age and ended before the world could define him. Between George IV's decadence and Victoria's permanence, he became the hinge no one stops to notice. You walk along the chapel floor, counting the slabs that cover centuries of royalty. Names blur. Edward, George, Charlotte, Henry, each once commanded armies or nations, now compressed into a few inches of brass and stone. The verger lights candles for evening prayer. Their glow softens the carvings and casts a golden seam along the stone that seals William's vault. You think of the lead coffin below, still intact, insulated by oak and air. the bones within resting in the same posture you once saw before it was sealed. Sometimes history measures value not by deeds, but by the spaces they prevent from breaking. During his 7-year reign, William IV kept peace, no revolutions, no wars. He signed every bill that would modernize Britain's institutions. Yet he never claimed the credit. He reconciled with political enemies, restored dignity to a crown that had been cheapened by excess, and left it stable for the young niece who would rule after him. That is not glory, but it is grace. In the Royal Navy, his name endures differently. Old sailors still toast the Sailor King when ships cross the equator or return from storm. A few vessels still carry the name Clarence in his honor. They remember the midshipmen who slept in hammocks, who once fought off boarding parties, who swore like any other man on deck. The sea keeps memory better than stone. Its tides, though erasing, are also faithful. You recall the night he died, the rasp of his breathing, the clock at 2:12 a.m., the Queen's vigil. You recall Adelaide's quiet endurance, her face lit by candlelight and tears she refused to wipe away. She outlived him by 12 years, spending them in charity and solitude, her devotion completing the story he began. Their union, free of scandal, now seems almost saintly compared with what surrounded them. Time has turned their ordinariness into nobility. Beyond the chapel, Windsor hums with visitors. Children chatter, cameras click, footsteps echo on flagstone. None notice the faint scent of wax or the small draft seeping from the vault. A cold whisper that reminds you how fragile the barrier is between past and present. You sit on a bench beneath the stained glass window depicting the resurrection. The glass glows gold and blue. In the lower corner, a ship is painted, a tiny vessel among the biblical waves. It was placed there, the guide says, in memory of William's naval life. The detail goes unmentioned in most guidebooks, but it is enough. As evening settles, the verger dims the lamps. The last light falls across the marble inscription in memoriam William IV and Adelaide his queen. Their names are joined as they were in life, plain and unadorned. You think of what remains of them now: 2 lead coffins, a handful of portraits, a scattering of acts of parliament, and the lingering idea that decency itself can be a legacy. You close your eyes and imagine the chapel as it was that night long ago, candles burning low, breath thick with sorrow, the Queen whispering prayers no one could hear. The sound of the clock returns in memory. Tick, pause, tick. In that rhythm lies the truth of mortality. The body ends, but the pattern endures: breath, silence, remembrance. When you finally rise, the chapel is empty. You walk toward the exit, your steps echoing softly. Outside, the wind carries the smell of rain from the Thames Valley. The clouds gather, and for a moment you hear what could be the sea, a phantom surf rolling somewhere beyond the horizon. Perhaps that is fitting. For a sailor king, there can be no better epitaph than the endless sound of water meeting stone. At the gate you turn back once more. The castle windows glimmer, their reflections trembling in the puddles along the cobblestones. Each drop of rain seems to carry a memory of candlelight, of whispers, of all those who kept watch through history's quiet hours. You realize then that legacy is not only what is written, but what is remembered in stillness. He was not a conqueror. He was not a saint. He was something rarer. A man who held power without needing to prove it. Time will not carve his face into monuments, but it will carry his name softly, like a current beneath the noise of centuries. You breathe the damp air and whisper the words you once heard at his burial. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And somewhere in the distance, faint as memory, the chapel bell answers once, clear and final.